Alrighty, nyajong ichon isikitini chate pongi shede, one shede cho one ching, tilu shi halala, mlonku da video natia, etafachi fonko monene shede. Alright, so just last week we talked about how Jacob wrestled with God, and so throughout this encounter with him, because he was stuck in a situation where he couldn't go back to his father-in-law's home country because his father-in-law didn't like him very much, and he couldn't go back to his home country because Esau was waiting there to kill him. And so he was stuck right in the middle, and he didn't know where to go. And so he went to God for answers, and throughout like him seeking his answers, he partook in a wrestling match with God, and he felt a lot of physical pain, and he broke his hip actually, and all those that was God's mode of discipline toward Jacob in order to teach him a lesson. And so just after that encounter, Jacob left a changed man, so he had a change of heart, but he also left with a new name. And so his old name, Jacob, means deceiver, and now it means Israel, which means God fights. And so he learned to trust God more through that encounter. Alright, and so with this week's message, we will be talking about God redeems betrayal. And so before we get into this message, I would like to ask you guys to read Genesis chapter 37, verses 3 through 8, and that same chapter, but verses 18 through 28. And so pause the video and read those passages first before getting into this message so that you guys will understand more. Alright, so thank you so much for reading those passages. And so now we know that Jacob has a new name now, which is Israel. But does that mean that he's completely changed? You know, he had a change of heart. He learned how to trust God more. But does that mean he was perfect now? Of course not. And so in this case, he's not perfect because he's still playing the favoritism game. All right, you know how when he got his wives, he favored Rachel more than he did Leah and his other wives. And so in this case, he's now favoring Joseph, which is his youngest son, over the rest of his other sons. And so that was like very apparent when Jacob, gave Joseph a multicolored robe. And so that made his other brothers jealous. And also, you could say putting salt on the wound to make it hurt more or something. Joseph actually had a dream, and he told it to his brothers as well, saying that their pile of wheat bowed down to his pile of wheat. And so that symbolizes that he's going to rule over them in the future. And so just that enough, they had jealousy. They were very jealous of Joseph because he got that robe, he was loved by their father, and then next thing you know, he had that dream, which turned their jealousy into anger. And so with Jacob, or Israel, playing the favoritism game, he made the brothers jealous. He made his sons, or Joseph's brothers, jealous. And so with that jealousy turned into anger. And that anger turns into sin. Now you're thinking, Mike, yes, they were angry, and yes, you can get angry, but is that a sin? Is that a sin to get angry? Well, yeah. At your brother, yes. It clearly states that in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 and 22. If you're just even mad at your brother, you're committing murder already. But wait, Mike, they were plotting to kill Joseph, but they didn't actually kill him. So, is that really a sin? I mean, we're talking about betrayal here. So how did they betray? Or I guess who was betrayed in this case? Joseph, was he betrayed? No. They didn't pledge allegiance to him yet. And what about Israel, Jacob? Was he betrayed? He didn't know about it. So how can he be betrayed? And so the only other option left in this case is God. So how was God betrayed? Well, if we look at it, it was God's plan all along for Joseph to, you could say, rule over his brothers, to have authority over them. And so in order for God's plan to happen, Joseph needed to be alive, for one, and he needed to be with his brothers, for one. But wait, Mike, he's still alive, so they didn't actually commit it, right? Well, thanks to Reuben and thanks to Judah, those two were the two people who actually kept him alive. they wanted to kill him all along. But then those two stepped in, and one wanted to give him back to the father, which is Israel, and the other one, the idea to sell him off to Egypt. And so, and so now that he was alive, he wasn't with his family now to rule over them, and so that, in a sense, is a hindrance to God. And so, like I told you guys about the anger turning into sin, as sin is rebellion against God, and they probably pledged their allegiance to God since they were a nation under God back then. And so, breaking His rules, sinning, and yeah, pretty much the aspect of sinning is rebelling against God, which is betrayal. But long story short, throughout all this, God still redeemed them, like forgave them, through Joseph becoming like the second in command. He was sold into Egypt. He went through a lot of hardships to get where he was at, and so more like many years later, he became the second in command in Egypt. And his brothers, they went through like a big famine, and so they traveled to the land of Egypt where they met up with Joseph. And Joseph wasn't real. He forgave them, and so he actually saved his brothers through that act of becoming like the reigning over them. And so his vision came to pass. He was the ruler over his brothers. And this also applies to us when we also sin, when we get jealous of other people sometimes. We dare I say it, we think God's plan for us sucks. And we end up finding our own way through that. And it leads us to maybe a lot of other stuff, but it ultimately leads us to sin, and we don't live perfect lives. And so we do constantly sin, and we betray God a lot, but He still redeems us and accepts us back with open arms. Alright, so that was my message for today. I hope it impacts you in a way that will further your walk with God, and I pray that He blesses you throughout this week. And so I thank you so much, and I see you next week.